Sanibonani uphenyo walisiba usiba olumnyama ipeni elimnyama. The Spaniel the swart pen. Goeiemôre. Good morning, it's Penuel the black pen. I'd like to take this time out to thank Arend van Sail, who is a young leader at AfriForum, a great writer, spokesperson, intellectual in his own right. He normally sends me very interesting articles and tidbits to read in our quest, myself and him and other like-minded people, in building a better country for all. It's a bit of an old article that I'm going to read, but I think it's so poignant and I think it's so important for the country that we're living in today, and it's very educational. For some of the black people who are going to be listening to this, I hope you will be able to listen to this without too much emotion, and maybe I'll say a few of my thoughts after reading it. So this is from biznews.com, and it's a 2015 article by Alec Hogg, released on the 30th of October, 2015. The title is, Here's Andrew Kenny's Orania column the Citizen doesn't want you to read. Andrew Kenny's weekly column in the Citizen newspaper has built up a strong following over the years, the engineer being appreciated for his forthright and perceptive insights into the tragedy at the state's electricity utility Eskom. But Kenny has other arrows in his quiver, including a curiosity that took him to Orania, the Afrikaner-only town in the Northern Cape province, between Hopetown and Pietersville. Kenny was impressed with the civility of the people and safety of the environment, and intended telling his readers what he had found. Excepting the editor decided the 400 words would offend the Citizen's readers. Rather ironic, considering the newspaper was created and funded by the apartheid government. Here's the column the Citizen doesn't want you to read, with Kenny's explanation of what went down. This piece was first published on Politics Web. This is from Alec Hogg. And now by Andrew Kenny. On Thursday, the 8th of October, I visited Orania for the first time. I stayed there for 4 days attending a libertarian conference. Orania was a revelation to me. I was enormously impressed by its success, decency, safety, modesty, friendliness, cleanliness, by its spirit of goodwill, by its egalitarian attitudes, and above all, by its prevailing philosophy of freedom. I write a column for the Citizen newspaper, which appears every Tuesday. So on Sunday, the 11th of October, from Orania, I wrote my 400 words on Orania, reporting what I had seen and saying how extremely different Orania was from apartheid South Africa. The editor of the Citizen, Stephen Mutale, rejected my column. He would not allow it to be published. Below is my account of this episode and my thoughts on Orania, race and freedom of speech in South Africa. I shall explain why favorable reports on Orania seem forbidden by most of the big media. My traveling companion and I, setting out from Cape Town, entered Orania on Thursday afternoon at a slow pace in my 1984 Suzuki SJ410, which is incapable of a fast pace. Orania lies on the south bank of the Orange River between Colesberg and Hopetown on the R369. Since there are no border fences, we did not know when we were entering the area of Orania until we came to the town of Orania. There, turning off the R369, our only reception was a sign saying, Welkom in Orania, and featuring the Orania icon, a little boy rolling up his sleeve, either to engage in muscular Christian good work or to defend the righteous against the school bully. I am the least perceptive of men, but upon entering Orania, I was immediately aware of a mood of peace and safety. Driving to our accommodation, the charming Andi Uver on the Banks holiday resort, we looked left and right at the houses on our way. Some were Cape Dutch, some were steel frame, some were wooden, but there were no mansions and no shacks. Some houses were sparse and prefab. There were some people living in caravans. There were indication of poor whites in inverted commas, but there was no destitution. There was a spirit of simple dignity. The streets were clean, simple, and tidy. We noticed immediately that all the menial labor was being done by white men and white women, white garden laborers, white waitresses, whites cleaning the streets, white petrol attendants, and whites washing the linen and cleaning the lavatories. Never before in my life in South Africa have I felt so safe. For the first time ever, when I spoke to Afrikaners in my appalling Afrikaans, they replied in Afrikaans rather than looking horrified and replying in English. All the street signs, all orange, and all the menus in the restaurants were in Afrikaans only, which as an Engelsman pleased me. We passed the famous Koeksister statue and the Betsy Verwoerd Museum, whose simplicity matched the mood of the place. We spent a wonderful 4 days there. The Libertarian Conference was the usual lively, argumentative, and interesting event, which as usual came to no conclusions at all. I think libertarian is a silly word, but it has been introduced to distinguish it from the correct word, liberal, which has lost its meaning. I'm a classic liberal, believing in liberty, rule of law, small government, and equal rights for all. The trouble is that in the USA, and to a lesser extent the UK, liberal means socialist or illiberal. A liberal in the USA believes in big government and state control. Naturally, there was much discussion about whether Orania fulfilled libertarian ideals. Orania was established as a place to protect the Afrikaans culture and Christian values. In 1991, the founding fathers bought 500 hectares of parched Karoo scrubland for 1.6 million rand. Photos of the place then show a desolate, abandoned wasteland whose only redeeming feature was proximity to the Orange River. 24 years later, there has been a remarkable transformation, perhaps unrivaled on earth. Orania now is over 8,000 hectares, 80 square kilometers, and worth over 500 million rand. Just over 1,000 people live there. Efficient, modern irrigation systems have turned the brown semi-desert green, growing crops of lucerne, maize, almonds, olives, and for some reason I don't understand, pecan nuts. Orania seems to have developed a niche market in pecan nuts. It also grows fruit, vegetables, and flowers in greenhouses and has livestock. Its industrial center provides for all its water, sewerage, and electricity infrastructure. It provides its own services, yet pays taxes to South Africa. It is acutely sensitive of environmental protection and uses in a sensible way the best benefits of solar power, modern agriculture, and waste separation. At our chalet, there were 2 rubbish bins marked herwinbaar and nie herwinbaar. The schools in Orania, using both traditional and informal teaching methods, have got a 100% matric success, sending their pupils to universities all over South Africa. There is essentially no crime, there is no unemployment. I tried to summarize all of this in 400 words and sent it off to the Citizen. I made a big point of saying that Orania was nothing like apartheid, was in fact the antithesis of apartheid. On the 12th of October, the editor of the Citizen, Stephen Mutale, sent me this email. Hi Andrew, I'm afraid this piece might be interpreted by many as a tacit glorification of segregation and may be highly offensive to victims of apartheid. I have therefore decided to not publish it. Regards, Stephen Mutale, editor, The Citizen. On the 15th of October, I replied to him as follows. Dear Stephen, thank you for the courtesy of informing me that you had rejected my column on Orania. You as the editor have the right and the duty to accept or reject articles as you see fit. That is paramount. But I have to say I'm puzzled that you think my column may be highly offensive to victims of apartheid. In my column, I made it clear that Orania could not be more different from apartheid, an oppressive, racist, socialist system. President Mandela, President Zuma, and Julius Malema, when he was in the ANC, have all visited Orania and have all been graciously received and respected. None of the 3 seem to have found anything offensive at all in Orania. Orania has no exploitation, no coercion, and no black maids or black garden boys working for the white madam or the white boss. The whites do all their own menial labor. Orania is a complete rejection of all the horrible ways of apartheid. I think it serves as a fine example to all nations in South Africa who might wish to have a traditional community of their own, to honor their own language, religion, culture, and values. Please treat this email as public information to show anyone you please. I shall do the same for your emails. Best wishes, Andrew Kenny. When I told a friend about this, she replied, accurately, I think, that a white editor would be more likely to reject my column than a black editor. Why does the big media in South Africa regard Orania with such hostility? I believe I know the reason why, and I shall explain it. But first, let me set out my thoughts on freedom of speech in South Africa. Is anyone in South Africa free to publish her or his views on any subject in a truthful way? Of course not. Our newspapers and broadcasters are technically free to publish what they want. but in fact a stifling self-censorship prevents all but a small selection of politically correct views from being heard. On all discussions about race, there is a large range of topics, facts, and opinions that are forbidden. The great racial problems may not be discussed, even though everybody knows perfectly well what they are. No newspaper or broadcaster is fair, balanced, and impartial. This is humanly impossible. Publicly owned media should, I suppose, aim to be unbiased, but in fact all of them are greatly biased. The BBC in Britain even worse than the SABC in South Africa. But I see no reason why privately owned media should even pretend to be unbiased. Freedom of speech depends not on every newspaper being fair, but on every newspaper being free to write what it wants. As I said to Mutale, he must have the right to reject or publish any article as he sees fit. Why did he reject my Orania column? I believe most editors in South Africa would have probably done the same. The reason obviously has to do with race, the Afrikaners, their culture, and their history of oppressing black people under apartheid. The fact that Orania is the complete antithesis of apartheid doesn't seem to matter. There is something in the notion and philosophy of Orania that does seem to matter. I believe the answer lies in African and Afrikaner history. The moral history of the Afrikaner has two themes, one good, one bad. Most of Afrikaner history is a struggle for liberty and independence. Their great track was mainly in pursuit of a land of their own, beyond the fetters and humiliations of the British Empire, a land where they could be free and could enjoy in full their own culture, their own language, and their own religions. They fought a terrible war against the British Empire for exactly the same reasons. Afrikaner society as it existed from the 18th century on was liberal, democratic, and egalitarian within their own ranks. Unlike traditional African or European societies, they had no royal families or deep class divisions. They were highly constitutional people who never experienced a coup or a civil war amongst themselves. But on the other hand, they abused the black people of South Africa. Until 1948, their conquest and enslavement of native people was no worse and often much better than that of European people invading and conquering the native peoples of North America and Australia. In 1948, the white people of the USA, Canada, and Australia, thanks to the annihilation of the natives through disease and genocide, were in a huge majority. In 1948, the white people of South Africa, now led by the Afrikaners, were in a rather small minority. This is the complete and total explanation why South African whites chose apartheid and others chose democracy. Apartheid was nothing other than an excuse for white minority rule. It differed from the old colonial rule in only two ways. First, the racial policies and exclusions were all written down in law and brutally enforced. Second, it devised a moral justification for the enforced separation of the races. It said that unless black Africans were protected in their own Bantustans or homelands, their African culture would be crushed and displaced by the dominant European culture. This is exactly what is happening in South Africa right now. But of course, the Bantustans were just a cruel farce based on coercion, not choice. The rule of South Africa by black Africans since 1994 has been profoundly different from that of white Afrikaners from 1910 to 1994. One has been democratic and the other not. But it is the cultural differences that explain hostility to Orania. Both black Africans and white Afrikaners railed against British colonial rule. Both wished for their own culture and language. But when they came to power, only one of them made their wishes come true. When the Afrikaners came to power, they put a huge effort into unifying and formalizing the Afrikaans language. They set up schools and universities teaching in Afrikaans, and most critical of all, Afrikaner leaders sent their own children to be taught in Afrikaans. They tried to make sure all Afrikaner children, including the poor, got a good education. When the Africans came to power, they did nothing of the kind. They made no effort at unifying black languages. They did not set up schools and universities teaching in black languages. African leaders made a point in sending their own children to be taught in English. Many seemed deliberately to choose schools where most of the teachers are white. With good schools for their own children, they betrayed the great mass of black children with a truly awful schools. A West Indian scholar, Lloyd Best, devised a term Afro-Saxon to describe the black African who yearns for everything British and European and is ashamed of everything black and African. Robert Mugabe is a prime example, showing contempt for black people and trying always to dress, drive, talk, and act like a white Englishman. Afro-Saxons dominate the ruling black classes of ex-British colonial Africa. The ANC rulers are predominantly Afro-Saxon. The louder they shout about African values, the more ashamed they are of them. A deep and profound self-doubt about their African identity cripples them psychologically and manifests itself in resentment and rage, as you can read almost every day in the comment sections of our newspapers. Whenever you hear an African politician calling for African solutions for African problems, you know that by African solutions, he means a German car, English suits, Italian shoes, a clinic in London, and above all, education for his children in a European language. The African leaders who have these self-doubts and who want their children to be taught in English are painfully aware that the Afrikaners have no self-doubts, are proud of their culture and their language, and want their children taught in Afrikaans. Afrikaner pride shows up African doubt, and this infuriates a section of the black ruling classes. This explains their anger against Afrikaners teaching in Afrikaans at Afrikaans universities. At a Kuro school, a private school, recently there was outrage because two classes seemed racially segregated. It turned out that one class was taught in Afrikaans, which all the white parents chose, and the other in English, which all the black children chose. Somehow or another, the critics managed to see racism in this, but all they were really experiencing was African self-doubt. This is the reason why Orania is so resented by the big media. Orania shows Afrikaners celebrating their own language and their own culture in a way that self-doubting blacks do not. This upsets the self-doubters. Politically correct white editors are acutely aware of black self-doubt, even though they would never dare to admit it or write about it. If there were a black African version of Orania somewhere in South Africa, operating in the same way, celebrating the culture, traditions, language, and religion of, say, Pondo, Venda or Swati people, I doubt if anyone would have the slightest objection. Favorable reports about it would be published in our newspapers. It is the fact that Orania is Afrikaans that bothers the politically correct. The big questions about Orania are over race. Does Orania discriminate on race? If it does, should it be allowed to do so? There is absolutely no racial discrimination for any visitors to Orania, as our black libertarian experienced for himself. There is no racial discrimination within the community, but the community seems to be all white. In brackets, I'm not sure about this and obviously cannot define white. Some of the whites look pretty dark, but then so do I. Orania is a private company, not a municipality. To become a resident of Orania, you must appear before a selection committee consisting of existing residents. The two main criteria are that you must respect Afrikaner traditions and the Afrikaans language, and you must respect the Christian religion. A non-Afrikaner and an atheist might be accepted provided that they fitted in with the Afrikaner Christian culture. Would a black man, a black African, or a colored be accepted if he spoke Afrikaans and was a devout Christian? We asked this question several times to the Orania fathers, and every time they emphasized there was no official race discrimination in the selection. But was there unofficial discrimination? Would the residents just feel that a man with a dark skin wouldn't fit in with the Orania culture? The answer was always that would depend on the circumstances. The fathers, I have to say, were charming, thoughtful, intelligent men. If Orania in practice does discriminate on race for the selection of its residents, should this be allowed? Unhesitatingly, I say yes. I'd say the same of a similar Pondo, Venda or Swati community. I'd say that it should be free to discriminate against whites and other races becoming residents. Everybody agreed that a degree of private discrimination should be permitted. When you have a dinner party in your home, you should be able to choose who you want to come on any grounds you wish, including race. A lesbian club should be able to discriminate against men and straight women, and the managers of the club should make the classification as they choose. South Africa has many organizations restricted to black membership, such as the Black Business Council. I see no reason why a private residential community such as Orania should not be able to choose its member residents on race. Down the ages, thinkers of all political and religious persuasions, from Karl Marx to Ayn Rand, have tried to design the perfect society. Most practical realizations of these designs have been nightmares, with communism being the prime example. Small religious communities have done much better, and perhaps small is the key to success. Another key to success is organic development on guiding principles rather than implementation of a rigid master plan. Orania seems, to me, a great success. It has many attributes that all libertarians seek: liberty, voluntary cooperation, mutual respect among all, a free market, and a spirit of enterprise and hard work. The garden laborer lives next door to the business leader with not much difference in their houses. There's dignity for all. The sense of community and shared purpose is tangible even to insensitive people such as me. Near the center of town is Monument Kopi. It is a rather eerie little hill, especially at sunset, which is when we visited it. There on plinths are the busts of Paul Creer, Hendrik Verwoerd, John Foster, and other Afrikaner leaders, including apartheid leaders. The busts form a crescent, all facing into its center, where there is a small statue, about 400 millimeters high, of a small boy rolling up his sleeve. One must be aware of reading too much symbolism into things, but I wonder if the message is this: for good or bad, all you men are part of our Afrikaner past, and so we honor you, but this little boy is our future. I should say that Orania does indeed represent an Afrikaner ideal, and does indeed embody the virtues of their struggle and their history. A rather good publicity DVD for Orania calls it a homecoming for our people. That seems true. I experienced one regret there, or rather one irritation. I hate the fact that in South Africa you are not allowed to put petrol into your own car, but must have an attendant do it for you. This takes much longer. It is a luxury when you are abroad to do it yourself. At the petrol station in Orania, I was delighted to see a sign on the pump saying self-help dienst, but then I saw a big geen above it. So I had to have my Suzuki full by an attendant, a white man of course, a big jolly Afrikaner in shorts and a hat, who had no objection at all to my taking photographs of him. In fact, he encouraged me to take more. Was this because Orania is making some point about the need to provide labor for all? Not at all. I'm sure it's just that it is against the law in South Africa for you to fill up your own car. And Orania is very law-abiding. In closing, it says Andrew Kenny is a professional engineer with degrees in physics and mechanical engineering. He has 16 years of experience in the energy industry, including working for Eskom, the state-owned utility, and as a researcher at the Energy Research Center at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. He now works as an independent engineer in the field of energy. This article is republished with the author's permission. It appeared first on Politics Web. Again, biznews.com, the title of the article, here's Andrew Kenny's Orania column The Citizen Doesn't Want You to Read, from the 30th of October 2015 by Alec Hogg. The reason why I decided to read this article, for me, because a lot of the stuff is stuff that maybe some of you have heard, maybe you haven't. It's to highlight this part in the middle, which really triggered me very much. The part that says, I'm going to read it again. Sorry, let me see if I can find it. In summary, it basically speaks about how the white Afrikaner and the black African both were fighting against the British colonial masters and rule. And that when both of them came into power, the white Afrikaner under the National Party and the black African under the ANC government, which we still have today, only one of them made the wishes of their people come true. The white Afrikaner, with the power they had in government, made sure that they built white Afrikaner schools and universities and made Afrikaans a prioritized language, to a point where in June 1976, black children marched against Afrikaans as a language, of instruction, and some of them were killed. Very tragically, today we have June 16 Youth Day, one of the tragedies of apartheid. But they were saying we want Afrikaans to be our language because they were in power and they wanted that to be. And they tried to make it happen. Of course, didn't really happen, but they managed to build their schools. They managed to build their universities. They managed to build Afrikaner pride, which we still see today. And Orania becomes an example of this Afrikaner pride, which understandably would trigger a black African when they think of June 76, when they think of the apartheid government and the forced land removals, when they think of the unfair jailing, killing, oppression, exploitation of black Africans. It makes sense why Orania triggers them. But of course, these articles try to explain that Orania is not the apartheid government. And Orania does not say, let us go and oppress black people. It is saying, although the apartheid government did bad things, we are still white Afrikaners and we are proud of it. We are not ashamed of being white Afrikaners because we fought for our stake in this country. Now, on the other hand, you've got black Africans under the ANC government who have come into power and have not even tried to ensure that black languages, led by isiZulu, isiXhosa, and then others, have not infiltrated schools at mass so that you have Zulu schools, Xhosa schools, Sotho schools, Tswana schools, Pedi schools, Xitsonga schools, Chivenda schools, Swati schools, Ndebele schools in this country. We do not have such schools. You can go to an Afrikaans school where as you walk in, everything is in Afrikaans. Goeiemôre mevrou, goeiemôre meneer, hoe gaan het vandag? When you go to play rugby, it's in Afrikaans. When you go to the Snoopy, the tuck shops, you can buy it in Afrikaans. When you engage, when you go to the churches, the Nederlandse Gereformeerde Kerk, the NG Kerk, it's in Afrikaans. And they have businesses, which are Afrikaner businesses, which you can trade in Afrikaans. The black government has not been able to, like the apartheid government, build institutions that are isiZulu, isiXhosa, Siswati, whatever. Setswana, sorry, Swati, etc. They have not been able to successfully do that. If anything, the leaders, as Andrew Kenny points out, they want to send their kids to the best English schools that have white teachers. They have not built schools on African beliefs. Omvelngane, Otik, or Kamata. We do not have schools that have African beliefs. They do not have schools and spaces where African dress is worn with pride. The African leaders themselves do not wear African dress. The first time we saw that, and this is why it really upset a lot of the uppity black people, was with ex-President Jacob Zuma, who was a proud Zulu man, who would get on podiums and speak proudly in isiZulu. I have met many Afrikaans people who have told me, I love how that man loves his culture. I may not like him. I think he's corrupt. I think he's destroying the country. But I love how he loves his culture. He would visit KwaZulu and wear his Zulu attire, ibheshu, sometimes umqhele. He made sure that unlike uThabo Mbeki, who lives in suburbia, unlike ex-President Nelson Mandela, who lived in suburbia in Houghton, he made sure that he had a compound in Kandla, where he came from. And in the compound, there were thatched rondavels, or rondo, a traditional cultural man who loved his Zulu heritage and who could dance and sing in isiZulu, who would sit with abafana, you know, the tray, the Zulu tray with the meat, and eat with other men, who would drink gladly from a calabash, ukamba, umqombothi, the African beer, and would sing beautifully in isiZulu and dance, agiye, asine, umsholoza, acule, kube mnandi, and you could feel the passion. And that's why so many black Africans loved him. Of course, under the ANC, he himself failed. Maybe under the University of Zululand, Yamangosutu Buthelezi and the Zulu kingdom, make the University of Zululand a Zulu. And with the taxi industry and other industries, create an economy under the Zulu banner. And say, just like the Afrikaner, we will build a Zulu economy. And make sure that Ilanga newspaper, Isolezwe, are fully Zulu owned. And make sure that we have a Zulu media. Make sure we have Zulu retail stores, our own version of ShopRite. Make sure we have our own Zulu banks, Itala. Make sure that it's fully Zulu owned. When you get in there, sawubona unjani, hayi ngiyaphila. Besacela ungisize ngidinga imali. Failed. But he tried. But he was different from President Nelson Mandela, President Thabo Mbeki, President Kgalema Motlanthe, today President Cyril Ramaphosa, who has a good handle of the English language. And Andrew Kenny highlights that a lot of these black leaders suffer from self-doubt because everything about them, including Robert Mugabe, is British. They love the English language. They love wearing their suits, their European suits. They send their kids to these white schools, these European schools. Some of them identify as Christians, not as African spiritual believers. And what does this say about the type of leadership that black people have in this country? Compared to white Afrikaner leaders, compared to white English leaders. You even look at the Indian Arab Muslims in this country who ensure that their children learn Arabic, the language that the Quran is written in. Their children every day go to madrasa near the mosques. They have built, as much of a minority they are as the Indian Arab Muslims, they have built these beautiful mosques around South Africa. And their children after school go to madrasa and they go and they learn the Arabic as a language intentionally. And then they learn how to read and by heart the Quran. So that in the way they live, when they leave school with their uniforms, they go and they dress in their traditional Muslim regalia. And they live a fully Muslim traditional life. They have knowledge of self. Knowledge of self. The black African child does not have such institutions. Where after school they go to African spaces to learn African spirituality and beliefs. Where they every day intentionally learn isiXhosa, where they learn Xitsonga, where they learn isiNdebele, passionately every day, where they dress every day when they leave school, they go and they change and they wear their traditional attire. These were some of the things that I was wishing for growing up. And at some point in my area of consciousness, these were some of the things I yearned for. I went to and studied in the Eastern Cape at Rhodes University, Amakhanda, in Grahamstown. And when I saw the Xhosa men and the beauty of Uyentabeni for initiation and their rite of passage from boy to man, and I contrasted that with the Jewish bar mitzvah, where the 13-year-old boy goes from boy to man, and they taught the principles of being a man, and you need to provide and protect, and the beauty of the Xhosa language. And I'm like, I wish KwaZulu, there was something like this. I wish it was really teeny. Today, Miss Zulu had these spaces where young African boys, young Zulu boys, as soon as they maybe finish school, or maybe as soon as they finish primary school, they go on this camp, this 1 week, 2 week camp, where they are taught the Zulu songs for weddings, where they are taught the Zulu songs for funerals, where they are taught Zulu songs for Thanksgivings, where they are taught the rituals. This is what happens at a Zulu funeral. This is what happens in a Zulu wedding. This is what happens when you're giving thanks. This is how you build umsamo, where you speak to your ancestors. And this is the protocol. And this is the attire. It's this, etc. And go and learn. Who are you, boy? This is my surname. Go and find your history. And maybe write a book. A conversation I had with Ubabu Ngwenya, Judge Jerome Ngwenya, who is the custodian, not the custodian, the trustee of the, I don't know if he's the trustee, but he manages in Ngonyama Trust. There's currently fights between him, Suzulu, Mango Sutu Teles, and the government around Ngonyama Trust. But he was telling me that there was a wish to build an African museum, a Zulu museum rather, where you'd have these books where if they ask him, they open the book at the camp and they're like, oh, Mlotshwa, a split. Umzilankata, Uzita, Tina si Ozita, Ozita, this is the heritage, the legacy, the lineage. And then Nazi Tagazelos again. Uzita, Uhambaganj. And then I know my lineage, my heritage, the patriarchal at least. My father, Uzwelaki, Ufinias, Umfana Gamsongelo, Timothy, Umfana Gamsizi, Noskota. All the way up. Ozita, Ontumbez, Ontanzi. Sholoza, when wapewaneche wavutwiche, to show how stubborn we are as Zulus. We don't have that. The Zulu royal family has failed dismally to even begin conversations around those things. Instead, they want to look at young girls with their breasts out, testing for virginity so they can find virgin women to be with, but they are not grooming the men to be Zulu men that are proud and go out there. What we know of Zulu men today is that they own taxis and they have guns and they love Maskandi. But it has not been formalized so that every Zulu boy can sing beautiful Maskandi music, so that every Zulu boy maybe has a stake in the taxi industry, so that every Zulu boy maybe is trained militarily so that they can defend their families. And the Afrikaners are so proud, and I'm blessed and I'm privileged to have been raised in Newcastle in KZN, where I was exposed very deeply to the Afrikaner culture in the schools I went in the languages I spoke, in the sport of rugby, and in singing in choirs led by Afrikaner choir conductors who inducted me into the Afrikaner passion. Braais, kuier, Cook sisters, the love for rugby, the love for koor and kultuur. And I was like, this is beautiful. And just like Amaxhosa and these things, I was like, I wish the Zulus had something similar. And in Newcastle, I got exposed to the Muslim community because there's a great Muslim community there. And I made a lot of friends in the Muslim community. My maternal grandfather, Chota Hussein Amin, was an Indian Arab Muslim man, my mother's father. And I'm getting to meet some of my family members on that side. They're from Pietermaritzburg apparently, but they were in Washbank. They're close to Ladysmith in KZN. And I got to see the beauty of the Muslim heritage and the Indians and how they live and their love for their foods. Today we enjoy their curries and their biryanis and all these things. And their love for who they are, their sense of self-identity. And a lot of the black Africans don't have that, because when their leaders who claim they fought for liberty against British colonial rule, white Afrikaner rule, when they came into power, they did not put in the work to push for institutions of black Africans, black African spirituality, black African attire and food, and a celebration of everything black and African. Today, of course, I've surpassed all of that, and I'm building myself into being a futuristic human being, transcending Afrikaans, Zulu, Muslim, Indian, transcending being South African, transcending being... I'm trying to be like the guys at Silicon Valley, some of the guys in Dubai. I'm trying to build myself and my followers in penalism to become futuristic, to be like, we've seen all of this, we've studied all the history. We will take some of the best from all of these things. We will take the language, which allows us to access as many regions as possible, whether it is English, Mandarin, Spanish, it's fine. We will take the best from the religions, some of the practices that make sense. We will take the attire which makes best affordable, easy to find, easy to clean, allows us to have some sort of unity and identity, and we will move. And we will find other good people that transcend race. And our spiritual belief will be Penol is God. Our spiritual belief will be, if Penol is not God, I am God. I'm the center of my own universe. And that's where I'm at. But that's a conversation for another day, because I am not about these things. I've transcended. And some people don't understand what that means. But in the transcension, I'm still looking to learn and see and piece together what works and what doesn't work. And I look at the oppression and the suffering of black Africans under the hand today of their own black African leaders. The white Afrikaner leaders uplifted their people. The white British leaders in South Africa uplifted their people. In their own ways, the Indian Arab Muslim leaders uplift their people. There are other spaces where certain groups uplift their people. Some of the Greeks, some of the Portuguese, some of the Lebanese, the Jewish people in this country uplift their people. The black Africans who look up to ANC, EFF, some of their church pastors who are rich while they are poor, they are not being uplifted. And when they see an Orania, instead of looking in the mirror and saying, what am I doing? They are very quick to get triggered and then be like, no, that's rubbish, shut that down. You want to shut that down, but you're not building anything for yourself. Where's the rationale? These people are secluded, they're alone, they're keeping to themselves, and you are angry because you cannot do what they have done. You have not been able to create fences and borders around townships and say no one will enter here unless we agree. And if you are not a resident, you are not allowed to open a business here. And if you're going to open a business, it has to go through our committee, and your business must give back to the community. And you can't just have random foreigners, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, Ethiopians, Somalians, Nigerians, Malawians, Mozambicans coming to operate here and taking money from a black South African township and sending it back to their countries of origin. While your people, your black Africans, refuse to buy from black South African owned businesses and make excuses. When you're not saying it's the white British, then it's the white Afrikaners. When it's not the white Afrikaners, oh, Amandia. If it's not Amandia, all of a sudden it's black African foreigners. If it's not them, then it's the Chinese. It's everyone's fault except your own. But you refuse to buy from black South African businesses. You refuse to work for black South African businesses. You refuse to build fences and borders around your communities, your townships, and say, we will not let anyone in here unless they are a resident, unless we have approved. You don't just get into Orania when you feel like it, but you're allowed to go into Soweto, Alex, Kwamashu, Kukuletu, whenever you feel like it. I'm dancing. Because who the hell cares? It's a township. It's a tarafe. Something to think about. Something to think about. Penuel the Black Pen.